Morning, everybody. Again, it's absolutely wonderful to see everybody here. I'm David Kaplan at Tufts. I know most of you, but some new faces, which is also awesome. And as Caroline said, this is our fourth year of convening the community here. And our goal is very, very simple. It's just to get people networking, get people talking, and obviously keep Tufts at the top of your list of where to come, one-stop shopping for anything cell ag. And this year, you notice we kind of evolved the title a little bit into Future Food because it's a kind of the way the whole space is evolving. So stay tuned on that. The other thing I'll say is that it's just personally amazing to see everyone get together like this. I think this is one of the highlights of my year. Either that means I have a very boring life or it's really good. So let's assume it's really good, right? So as you all know, if you've been here before, we kick things off with a fireside chat just to kind of calibrate how the last year has been and a glimpse to the future. So let me first just hand the mic, or you have your own mic. So Bruce can say hello, introduce himself, and then we'll get to it. So Bruce, it's all yours.
Thank you very much, David. And like David, this is also a highlight of my year. So maybe we both have very boring lives. But one of my favorite aspects of this conference every year is hearing the introductions and Professor Genko sharing just how across the Tufts University ecosystem the commitment is to cellular agriculture. And every year we hear the commitment from administration, as well as the accolades for David as sort of the face of TUCA and the founding sort of base of what's happening here. And it's incredibly exciting to have somebody, to have a University of Tufts caliber and to have somebody of David Kaplan's caliber focused on cellular agriculture. One of the things that Professor Genko mentioned, it's 10 years. And David and I were chatting about how it was 10 years ago that Natalie Rubio came to David Kaplan and said, will you oversee my PhD thesis in cellular agriculture? And David said yes. And I said, I don't think this conference exists. I think the world of cellular agriculture is just like a radically different place. If not for Natalie Rubio coming to you and saying, hey, will you do this? And he said, yeah, absolutely. The conference would not exist if that had not happened. And for me, that's like one of the things that is just the power of one individual and also the power of somebody who is a student to go to one of the most impressive tissue engineers, biomedical engineers on the planet. And part of their job is to say, yes, I will supervise your PhD thesis. And obviously David was, he had already looked at these issues in other areas, but it wasn't his focus. And now it's his focus. It's really quite remarkable. You asked me to introduce myself. Bruce Friedrich. I am the founder and president of the Good Food Institute. Our birthday is February 1st. We'll be 10 years old. So GFI also 10 years ago right now. It was me and the person who started New Crop Capital. We started hiring staff in June of 2016. We put our website up on February 1st of 2016. So our 10-year birthday is coming up. And it really has been, so the private sector has been a little tough this year, as people know. Everything else has been on fire. I was having a conversation with a couple of people at UC Davis, including David Block, and David Block said it is impossible not to be optimistic about the future of plant-based and cultivated meat. And we were sitting there with Rosie Wardle from Synthesis Capital, and she was like, I think I might be able to do it. But the amount of scientific expertise and focus, like how we create a plant-based and cultivated meat, how we get to success, which at GFI we define as products that are price and taste competitive, is a maximally robust scientific ecosystem. And how we create the maximally robust scientific ecosystem from which the industry can spring is through government support for these technologies. And we have seen over the last year government support deepening in India, Israel, Brazil, Korea, Japan, China, a bunch of countries across Europe, including in Germany, where the Scientific Advisory Council to the German Agricultural Ministry put out a more than 300-page report that GFI could have written about what Germany should do to usher in alternative meats and what they should be supporting and how they should be prioritizing and what they should be doing from a regulatory standpoint. So that's one thing that is just like a specific proof point that I think is very exciting. And then the other sort of example of this, a couple of months ago I was in Seoul and I was speaking at a World Food Tech conference. The Prime Minister of Korea sent a speech that was read by their agricultural minister. The Speaker of the Parliament spoke. The President of the Chamber of Commerce, the person who's in charge of AI for Korea, the woman who's the former Justice Minister who now leads climate efforts for Korea. And then I had both a plenary presentation and was on a panel. And after my speech, the two people who were running the entire event was like, we absolutely have to have you back next year. And everybody I just mentioned was talking about cultivated meat. And the guy who runs AI for Korea he said, you know, China and the US are going to dominate in AI. We can't compete with China and the US. Their economies are just way too big. But we can dominate in food technology, in AI for food technology. And they are thinking explicitly about food tech for the world. And every single person that I just mentioned was talking about plant-based and cultivated meat explicitly from the dais. And Gerhard Schroeder, who was Prime Minister of Germany when Germany devoted $200 billion to solar, there is no, you know, solar's now going up the S-curve of adoption. That doesn't happen without Gerhard Schroeder. He, in his remarks, mentioned plant-based and cultivated meat probably a dozen times and specifically proposed that Germany and Korea should get together and create cultivated meat pilot plants sponsored by the government. And I could go on. I could give a bunch of other examples in all of the countries that I just mentioned. But the number of scientists keeps going up. The amount of government support keeps going up. The third-party validations of the importance of these technologies for climate mitigation goals, deforestation goals, global health goals around antimicrobial resistance, and pandemic risk, hunger and malnutrition goals, and most importantly, for creating the ecosystem funded by governments, the food self-sufficiency and food systems resilience focus every single year just keeps getting better in a world where 10 years ago it was zero. So we can talk a little bit more about some of the headwinds for the startups. But I would say that overall, we are much further along than I think anybody would have had a right to hope just 10 years ago. And I'm gonna pass it now to you, David, to answer the same question. Feel free to push back on anything I said or add color on anything I said, but really enthusiastic in particular to hear with a little more specificity about some of the stuff you're excited about vis-a-vis TUCA and the Tufts ecosystem.
Great, thanks. Thanks, Bruce. I guess I will first just reiterate what you said. I think I am so excited because of the science, number one, right? The amount of quality science, and I look at that just not on you know, specific papers and what's happening to bring down costs, to extend cell lines, to look at, you know, exploring new scaling, but just the sheer number, and I think Bruce alluded to that, the number of investigators now involved. You know, 10 years ago was a desert. I felt like the lone wolf on the planet that really thought this was a viable direction. And now I can look in the audience, right? We have a number of those folks in the audience and many around the world that we collaborate with and look to collaborate with. So I see that as a huge advance, and the science is going to keep going, and it's going to drive the field along with the tech that comes out of it. I think we'll get more into commercialization later, but I also see, and I don't know where Rohan is, but I talked about this at his last meeting. I see this, we're right now in the second wave. The first wave was the big companies trying to be a complete food company, and it's a really hard thing for a startup to do with the resources you can raise. And particularly in the kind of climate we're in with scarce financial support, we're kind of now in that second wave where the new companies, and you hear a lot about them, some of them at least coming out of the Tufts ecosystem today, they're really focused on doing one thing really, really well, and then trying to partner or bridge with others so that there's both a community and building that community, and that's all, again, thanks to Natalie and her team, but also people understand you really have to get really focused and do it well, and then bring that to the ecosystem. So I'm very excited about where we are on that space as well, even though funding is tight. Things are still moving forward, still getting commercialized, and you'll hear a lot again through the course of today about those activities. And the other thing is just the general sort of I would call trend of science driving the community further. And we do that here every year like this. And many of you know, and some of you are participating, at the end of this month, we'll have our very first Gordon Research Conference called Future Foods. And it encompasses alt proteins, cell ag, and plant-based. And the whole point of the meeting was to finally bring those three communities together for common discussions about the science. And so our goal is to build even more bridges between those folks, because everyone needs everyone, right, to make this a success. And it's not going to happen unless that happens. So the fact we've got the conference approved, it's happening. We have a great lineup of speakers, and then that'll happen going forward every 2 years as a programmed activity. And it's a very international gathering, despite some of the visa issues and other things these days. We're pretty excited in a few weeks to all gather again. And again, a number of the folks here in the audience will be there as well. So I'm very buoyed by that, and I'm also very buoyed by, funding is extremely difficult, as Bruce mentioned, but yet there's great beacons happening, and some of you know this. For example, the Gates Foundation is still funding work in at least related topics. And as you know, the Bezos Earth Fund has committed roughly $100 million over the last 2 years to support the establishment of 3 centers between London, North Carolina, and now Singapore. So, where one funding stream goes away, other funding streams open up. And so, science will drive that. I always believe that. That's where it starts. And people are the core of that, right? So I think we're pretty in a pretty good spot, and there's always the doom and gloom out there. Forget all that. It's just it's the passing clouds, but they're real. So we have to work within those constraints. No one's ignoring that, but I think looking at the progress over the last year again since we last met, I see just so many tremendous areas of progress that will continue. I had to make one more comment, and then I'll turn it back to Bruce, because I try not to talk too much, and I end up talking too much. So I also like to make a point that some of us get frustrated with our new sort of federal guidelines, at least in the U.S., right, where some of these cultivated meat terms are bad words. You can't use them in grants anymore. Otherwise you won't get a grant, right? So I think it's instructive for all of us to realize that where there's limitations due to whatever the current administration wants to see, there's also opportunities. And I feel like sometimes that's missed, right? And so 2 things I thought about just while I was waiting to come in here on opportunities. One is kind of very simple, and that's the fact that if we have the right messaging, and I'll get back to messaging later because I think we still fail to do that well, and I said that last year, we have the opportunity to talk about much healthier, much safer food going forward than anything we consume today. That message never gets out there, in my estimation. So I think as a community, again, we need to figure out how to get that collective information to the general public so that the political storms can at least start to swirl around some positive opportunities for all of us here to keep this moving, both on the research side and the commercialization side. And the other thing that's happening, and you read about it every week, is I'll just call it, and you didn't mention it, which is just the food security issue, right? And it's becoming more, in my mind, it's becoming more and more of a crisis for not just the US, but every country, right? And I hate to say it, but every month there's a new crisis in the world, right? And so, and you know, the most recent recall you just saw was radioactive shrimp coming into the US. And there's been, you know, issues with the beef coming in from South America and all these things, right? So the point is that's another point where we can emphasize the fact that by growing this technology, this community, whether it's in Massachusetts, in North Carolina, or California, we sort of position ourselves to be independent of you know, imports that we maybe don't have as much control over. So I think I'll just leave it with those two messages, that higher quality, more nutritious and safer food and controlling our own food inputs become real calling cards to me. And I think, again, if we can leave here, like I said last year, with like a call to arms, it's be, you know, whoever you are and whatever you do, get the message out. And how you do it is up to you. I'm not here to tell you what to do, but I think as scientists, we still fail to do that well. But I think for a lot of the people here, I think you could do that job quite well to help all of us keep this growing. So let me flip it back to you, Bruce, and let you add to whatever you'd like there.
Yeah,
and then we'll get to, I want to talk about your recent book that just came out after that.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Two things to build off that. The first is that the first two cultivated meat conferences, one of them was in 2010, one of them was in October of 2015. In both cases, there were almost no scientists being funded by governments who attended those conferences. The first one, the Dutch government was funding some science. Mark Post, who went on to found Mosamate, was being funded at that point by the Dutch government. And then Mark held a conference in October of 2015. And Mark was the only scientist there who was getting, well, his government grant was out. He was being funded by Sergey Brin still at that point, I believe. But Mark sent me the program. And I think there were like 19 scientists who spoke. And the only two who were working at all in cultivated meat were Mark and Marianne Ellis from the University of Bath. And it was a side project for her. She didn't actually have any funding for it. All of the other scientists, so Mark is a former professor of medicine from Harvard Medical School. He's an MD, PhD in tissue engineering, professor of tissue engineering at Maastricht University. He was the only scientist who had any money to do research into cultivated meat. Everybody else, there were multiple meat scientists who were friends and colleagues of Mark's, and tissue engineers who were friends and colleagues of Mark's. And he invited them to speak about the work that they were doing, the meat scientists, obviously in conventional meat, the tissue engineers for therapeutics, and basically speculate how could your work perhaps be shifted into cultivated meat and then scaled. So that's October 2015, the first conference. The first conference focused on plant-based meat science was the Good Food Conference in 2018. And now there are dozens of conferences all over the world about these technologies. And it happened pretty fast, relatively speaking, to most scientific advancements, including the Gordon Research Conference, which is really a sign that a scientific endeavor has arrived when the Gordon Research folks approve your proposal. And the first one is in a couple weeks, and it will be happening every 2 years going forward. I find that very exciting. And then I'm surprised that I didn't talk about food security. You know, it's difficult for me each time I have a microphone not to speak for an entire hour about any topic, as you can probably tell. So I apologize. But I did mention that all of those governments are funding science. And the they're not doing it. Really, none of them are doing it for climate or biodiversity or global health or hunger and malnutrition. They're all doing it for food self-sufficiency, food security, food systems resilience, just the fragility of the food system or the amount of food that they have to import. Governments care a lot about economics and their GDP, and governments care a lot about making sure that their citizens are fed. So GFI's lobbyists, whether that's in the US, so GFI operates, we have about 240 full-time staff around the world. The plurality of our team members around the world are scientists. Our goal is a maximally robust scientific ecosystem. The way we think you do that is you get governments to fund science. So that's our global battle cry. Government should be funding this work. Everywhere we operate, that's what we're focused on. And our pitch to governments is, this is a multi-trillion-dollar opportunity that can help you, if you're not food self-sufficient, Singapore, Japan, Korea, Israel, some of the European countries, this can help you move toward food self-sufficiency. If you are food self-sufficient, it is still a shockingly fragile supply chain. If you have to grow all of these crops and ship them to a feed mill and operate a feed mill and ship the feed to a farm and operate the farm and ship the animals to the slaughterhouse and operate the slaughterhouse, that is just incredibly inefficient. And David gave a couple of examples of what that has looked like recently. So for food systems resilience reasons, governments should shift in this direction. And I'm super excited to have John Bateman here chatting about the food security and national security reasons for a shift in the direction of alternative proteins as well. So those are the things that we're talking to governments about, and that's why governments have gone from literally zero funding 6 years ago to hundreds of millions of dollars a year now.
I think, I know we don't have a lot of time, but I think we could just lop off a couple of questions really quick on the slide, and then I want to save a few minutes for the book. So really quickly, I would just say at the top, looking at the top question, how to get governments working together, I think it starts with the scientists, to be honest, and that's going on all over the world right now. So for example, we work actively with the UK folks. We are trying to work actively with the folks in Singapore, and I know other colleagues are doing the same. So it starts with scientists and scientists, student exchanges, things like that. So any place we can find support to exchange students and faculty back and forth, that'll help. And then that leads to government discussions on joint programs, funding, and scale up and so on. And so that's the hope. And behind the scenes, without giving any details, there's lots of discussions going on like that. And I think Bruce is, has his finger on the pulse of that. I just have to address the second one because I'm the one who said it. So I look at two things, and a part of it is borrowed from colleagues, but one is the safety issue is just fundamental science. I call it control, and it's control, control, control. When you grow food the way we're talking about, you control the inputs, you control the outputs, and you control what happens in between. And you have all kinds of traditional food and evolving traditional food analytical methods, as well as evolving new methods to diagnose and know what's going on as you grow the food. So there is no way you could argue that current agricultural practices can compete with that level of control, is my point there. The second point is a more factual point that you can point to, and that is all the approvals, and Elliot can correct me if this has changed, of any commercial product now, and I think there's 7 companies now, including some in the room, that have products out there that can be sold commercially. They don't use any antibiotics in the process. Is that still the case? Okay, so my point is you can point to a fact like that and say that's completely differentiating yourself from the way current industrialized meat is produced. And we could go on, but those are 2 factoids that I would argue put us ahead of the curve on trying to make things safer, healthier, and so on. And you'll hear other things today in the course of today with the companies, what they're doing there, but that's where I would answer that comment. Let me stop there. I don't know if you want to address that, but then I want to just turn the tide a bit and have you, if you're not aware, Bruce just came out with a new book. The the title is a 4-letter word, so I don't know if that's good or bad, but it's called Meat, right? And so I'd like him just to talk about what I'm always interested in is why did you decide to do it? Because if anybody has ever written a book here, it has to be an effort of love because it's a pain. And number two, it's very timely. But I guess my real question is, why did you decide to do it in this past year? And having read the book and helped with inputs to the book, it's really a very balanced and very factual and very informative kind of historical look at where we are today. So I think I'd encourage all of you, and I have no stake in this, I'm just saying I think it'd be great to take a read of it. Any profits go directly to GFI, so I give Bruce kudos for that. I think that's a great way to do this as well. So let me turn it back to you.
Thanks, David. Thank you very much for that. I appreciate that. I mean, I mostly wrote the book to sort of focus on two things. And the first is when you have a conversation with somebody in the climate community or the global health community or the hunger and malnutrition community, you can often convince people who care about this, whether policymakers, NGOs, academics, they will generally agree that increased meat consumption is driving hunger and malnutrition, deforestation, climate change, antimicrobial resistance, pandemic risk. That's not hard. On climate change, you can get anybody who's studied the issue to agree that if meat consumption keeps going up, climate goals are going to be impossible. Most of those other things as well, we're going in the wrong direction on literally all of the contributing factors, including fossil fuels, on all of those issues. And there are really only two things anybody's looking at that would change the upward trajectory. One of them is convince people to eat less meat. The other is this, make the meat differently and better. And really, if you look at literally 100% of the climate models that are relied on, where they talk about how do we keep climate change within 2 degrees increase relative to pre-industrial times, literally all of them that do that assume decreased meat consumption. And not one of them is even hand-wavy about how that might happen. And then you point out to people that over the last 25 years, meat consumption is up 65%. When Livestock's Long Shadow from the UN Food and Agriculture Organization declared that animal agriculture is responsible for every major environmental harm, from the smallest and most local to the largest and most global, including water pollution, air pollution, climate change, deforestation. We were producing about 266 million metric tons of meat. Now it's 370 million metric tons of meat. Their prescriptions for mitigation were all really focused on things like methane inhibitors for cattle, sustainable intensification, et cetera. We've been working on that for decades. It's not changing the trajectory, and there's literally not one scientific paper that says it might. Our best case scenario with all of that, if it works, is 800 million megatons of mitigation, but increased animal consumption is gonna add 1.3 billion gigatons of additional emissions. So our best case scenario is still more emissions. So it was sort of the degree to which this is more and more on the agenda, but needs to be integral alongside, anytime you're talking about those issues and solutions, this should be front and center. So that was part of it. And then recent obituaries for plant-based meat and cultivated meat in the media, and the people who look at things like Believer Meats and Meatable's recent bankruptcies and say that is an indictment of the space. The science didn't work. Let's move on. So in the book, I dive into everything from artificial ice, which is the ice in your freezer, to artificial intelligence, and the trajectory that went from here's the idea to here is ubiquity for this product, and all of the naysayers and all of the failures that came with all of that. I mean, as one example, Henry Ford invents the Model T in 1908. Between 1900 and 1915, 500 car companies failed. That was not cars as a technology don't work. That was entrepreneurship, and starting a company is hard. During the dot-com bubble, NASDAQ lost 80% of its value. More than half of dot-com companies failed. Amazon fell from $213 a share to less than $6 a share. It lost more than 95% of its value. The media response was, why did anybody think somebody would buy pet supplies online? When is this Jeff Bezos character ever going to turn a profit? It was unrelentingly negative. And there are similar examples with airplanes, with home computers, with kind of the range of innovation. And so I was hoping to say in the book, this stuff is critically important. This is what innovation looks like. I do dive into reasons for scientific optimism across plant-based meat and cultivated meat. I created a poll and then followed up with about 30 scientists in cultivated meat, including David, about 30 scientists in plant-based meat, a bunch of people who were looking at blends and other things, and sort of summarized the conversations that I was having with people. And it's really focused on saying, we need this. It's possible. It's not inevitable. I tried to be even keel about it. But there are a lot of things that could have happened. Ezra Klein and Derek Thompson in their book, Abundance, talk about all of the innovations that haven't been discovered yet. And they also tell some stories, and I tell some stories in the book, of specific events that if not for that event, there would be no EV industry, there would be no solar industry, there would be none of these things that we now take for granted and think are inevitable. And then I also really dive in on the economic case. I really dive in on the food security, food systems resilient case, basically to just sort of level set the conversation, especially for the sort of media and influencers who look at a tough time for some startups. I mean, there are actually like really big bright lights in the startup world too. Fork and Good buying Orbillion, I think, is really exciting. Wild Type and Arya's here selling their product in a bunch of restaurants in the United States is really exciting. Vow has revolutionized bioreactor design and is producing at 20,000 liters, which I think is really exciting. Mosa Meat raising $17 million, Blue Nalu raising $1 million. There are lots of really exciting things too. But the scientific and government support just keeps going up, and really wanted to level set what's possible.
Great, thank you, Bruce. Maybe we can just kick off a couple of the questions. Do you want to take them, or you want me to? I don't know if you want to get
I will read them, and you can go first.
Yeah, they're on the screen over there, too. It's easier.
Oh, yeah. That is easier. Where are students going to work if this is science-driven? Are roles in academia growing, or is it industry?
And the answer is both. And the answer is we don't educate at the academic side for the past. We educate and prepare students for the future. That's why we're all here. So, funding is tight, so what? You go out there and you find a niche where you can spread your wings and grow and help everyone here continue to prosper for this field. So if the science is right and the people are driven, good things will happen. I really believe that, and I think that's the case in this field as well. So go to industry, go to academics, spread your wings in both if that's what you want. You could do that now easier than it's ever been. So I encourage all of you, and I know any of us in the academic side, if you need guidance and advice, come see us, right? So we're happy to do that. What's the next one? Do you want to add anything to that, or what you see in the market?
I will just take this moment to talk about the concept of the multiplier. So anybody in here who is working on plant-based meat or cultivated meat, working in this space, I'm sure the work you're doing is cutting edge and exciting, and you could probably talk people's heads off about it. It probably gets you really excited and passionate. And I will say vocationally, that's pretty flippin' beautiful. Most people can't say that. So that's awesome kind of in itself. But your power as an advocate on behalf of these technologies, the Natalie Rubio asking David Kaplan to supervise her PhD thesis, and now here we all are, and the ripple effect of that, globally, and how everything sort of plays into everything else. But especially people who are students, like your professors, it's part of their job to have conversations with you. So my pride and joy at GFI is our alt protein project. We have chapters at, we have a chapter at Tufts and top science and engineering schools all over the world. And the thing we're trying to impress upon these students is that your power as a university student to go talk to the top tissue engineering professors, plant biology professors, chemical engineering professors, and get them thinking about these technologies and ask them to add a module to their course, get courses added to the curriculum at your schools. The ripple effect of that is just absolutely colossal. So it's a bit of, make your own reality is part of my counsel, which I think is what I heard David say, but just saying that a little bit more explicitly.
We have time for one more question. So do you want to pick something off the list?
I'll just go with the one that's easiest to read at the top. Are there particular opportunities for cell ag presented by Maha and RFK Jr. that the field should be capitalizing upon today? Do you want to take that first?
The answer is yes, which is what I brought up before. I think if we can message the way we're talking about in a positive way to talk about healthier food, higher quality food, safer food, et cetera, I see a great opportunity to bridge the divide right now. How that happens, getting from point A to point B, that's the unclear part. That's why I'm enlisting all of you in the audience, whatever your role is, be an advocate for the positive messaging, see what you can do in your own space. And I think eventually some momentum, hopefully over the next year or so, we'll get to DC, and maybe GFI leads that charge, I don't know. But at some point, I think, yes, we need to have a sit down with the team in DC and talk about the positives that we're working on and why this is something they should really be investing in. We're not there yet. We all know that, but that doesn't mean we can't get there. So I'm committed to it. And I'm sure
I will. I really dive in the book in chapters 9 and 10 into how bipartisan what it is that we're working on is. We do have a lot of members of Congress as well, both senators and representatives who are supportive about the alt protein endeavor. If we lean in on food security, we lean in on national security, we lean in on economic opportunity. Those are all entirely bipartisan in the US. In Brazil, both the Bolsonaro and the Lula governments have been supportive of alternative proteins. No leader has been more supportive of alternative proteins than Benjamin Netanyahu, certainly not a shrinking violet liberal. The Xi government is very enthusiastic in China about alternative proteins. When you're talking about food security, food systems resilience, economic opportunity, these things are bipartisan. And we do have Republicans and Democrats in the US who are enthusiastic. The first major grant globally in like 15 years since the big Netherlands grant was the National Science Foundation under Donald Trump. And Donald Trump's Secretary of Agriculture, Sonny Perdue, very enthusiastic. His first Secretary of Agriculture, his first FDA Commissioner, Scott Gottlieb, very enthusiastic. 10 years ago, we had no idea what it was going to look like to get regulatory approval for cultivated meat. And I have some stories about close calls. But the main thing to say is that Scott Gottlieb and Sonny Perdue, if not for those two guys being supportive and saying our current regulatory regime is sufficient for approval of these technologies, it wouldn't have happened. And it was Trump that approved the first two, might have been just after Trump, but it was Trump's USDA and FDA that led to the first two approvals. And then it was really not much during 4 years of Joe Biden. And then there have been, I think, 4 more approvals in the first 100 days of Trump's second term. That's not because he's super excited about plant-based and cultivated meat, but it is because he is focused on, has a very pro-small business ethos, which was also a big part of why Sonny Perdue and Scott Gottlieb were excited about alternative proteins. So I do think the MAHA RFK, the focus on protein is not obviously bad for us. The plant-based meat products that are closest in taste parity to animal meat actually have significantly more protein. All of them have more protein than what they're replacing. It's equally bioavailable. Something like the Impossible hot dog has 3 times as much protein. So protein insanity is not bad for us. And things like looking at unnatural production practices, as David nodded at, and I have some pretty gut-wrenching, turning stories in the book as well about the cleanliness benefits of plant-based and cultivated meat. And I will just say, shameless plug, meatbook.org. My foreword is written by Caitlin Welsh, who served for about a decade in both the Obama and Trump administrations at the Department of State and the National Security Council. She is now Director of Global Food and Water Security for the Center for Strategic and International Studies, one of the top think tanks for national security in the world. She puts this in a national security context, which is what I also attempt to do a bit in Chapter 10. It is very much a sort of bipartisan industry focus book. And there are also, if you picked up a program, there are one-pagers for the book out there, as well as Jan Dukovitz's exciting new book, Feed the People. So encourage people to check out both of those.
Fantastic. So I think we'll close this initial fireside chat. Let's give a round to Bruce just to thank him for being here again. Thank you, Bruce.
Thank you, David.
I don't know where Matt is. Matt, you're on. I'll bring Matt Minolti up. Matt is our Associate Director for our Tufts University Center for Cellular Agriculture, and he will be running the next session.